Hey, folks, welcome to Draft Talk. Once again, I'm Alan Saunders, joined by Nick Farabaugh on Pittsburgh Sports Live. We're talking NFL Draft every day in the month of April, leading up to the 2022 NFL Draft at the end of this month. And we've started into going position by position. We talked about quarterbacks on Monday. We talked about tackles on Tuesday, but we've also got a lot of news that's been building up this week. So Nick and I want to kind of pause that, stretch, and talk about what's been happening around the league over the last couple days as it impacts the Steelers and the 2022 NFL Draft. There's actually a lot here, so it's going to be a pretty dense journey with you here on Wednesday, but we'll try to get through it quickly as we can. The first is a big trade between the Eagles and the Saints. We touched on it briefly yesterday, but the New Orleans Saints had been at 18. They now will trade that pick to the Eagles. They'll end up with 16 and 19, so 2 picks ahead of the Steelers for a quarterback. Maybe a quarterback needed team in the Saints. I don't know how much they are a quarterback needed team, but certainly a team that a lot of people have talked about drafting a quarterback, and now they take another pick ahead of the Steelers. Nick, your thoughts on how this trade just ahead of where the Steelers pick at number 20 impacts things for them in the first round?
Well, I think there's a lot of ways to look at it. It's not that, the Saints do need other needs other than quarterback. Wide receiver and tackle are the 2 big ones, I think, that stick out. They lost Tyrann Armstead. Really, it's just Michael Thomas and a bunch of other dudes in that room right now, wide receivers. So jumping ahead of LA is specifically what you would look at for maybe a receiver. Going up to like Jamison Williams, Garrett Wilson, someone like that, or tackle to jump over a few teams to get Cross or whoever might fall on the board. But there's also a few factors I think that it allows them to do. One, they need cheap, controllable players. They have a lot of things going against them in terms of the cap situation. And so having cheap guys on rookie contracts is always good for them, and they need that. But I think you trade this year for specific reasons. And I think there's 2 main things it could do in terms of quarterbacks. One, they can package those 2 picks together and move up the board to go get a Pickett or a Willis if that's who they really want. This is an all quarterback move, or it allows them to fill one of those wide receiver offensive tackle holes while also sticking at one of those spots and getting, say, a Desmond Ridder, which is interesting. A Ridder, a Pickett, whoever might be there at, say, 16 or 19, it'll allow them to stick there and get one of those 2. So it gives them some flexibility to fill in tackle or wide receiver so they can compete maybe this year with Jameis Winston or whoever they would draft, and also get the ability to draft their quarterback. So I think there's a few ways to do this. I can't definitively say it was a quarterback move because, again, they have Jameis Winston, they signed Andy Dalton, so they have 2 veteran quarterbacks there. But it could be a quarterback move and certainly gives them flexibility. But it could also mean it's a win-now move and they want cheap, controllable contracts at receiver and tackle. I mean, that's a very real possibility that neither of these picks are quarterbacks.
I think the one big thing it does for me is that that we've seen some mock drafts where you see a Malik Willis or a Kenny Pickett fall to the Steelers at 20. I now think I always thought those were far-fetched and not particularly realistic in the first place. I now think you can take those completely off the board. There's no way with 2 first-round picks, the Saints are going to let one of those guys get by them. Right? Like there's just no way to me. That's not happening. So I think we can cross, unless they're trading up, I think you can basically cross those 2 guys off the Steelers board. That Willis and Pickett, I mean, I thought it was very unrealistic that they would be there anyway, but now they are clearly not going to be there because the Saints are not going to let those guys get by them. Ridder, to me, is the other big change here, is that now I think makes it slightly more likely that he could go ahead of them. I didn't think the Saints sitting at 18 would have taken him, but now with 2 firsts, maybe they would. I'm not sure. I also thought that the Eagles, who had 2 picks at 15 and 16, was a prime place for someone else to move up in the draft to jump ahead of the Steelers and the Saints to prevent a quarterback from falling to them. So I had always kind of thought that this was a place where if Willis or Pickett was falling, that someone would come up and get them anyway. Now, maybe that somebody would have been the Steelers. It takes that off the board, right? We had talked, say, the Steelers moving ahead of the Saints with one of those Eagles picks. If a Willis or a Pickett starts to fall, I can see that, going away in this scenario. I don't know that it makes the Steelers a lot less likely to draft a quarterback. I just think it makes it a lot less likely that the Steelers sit at 20 and are able to get one of those top guys. I think that if they want a Pickett or a Willis, they will have to move up, and they'll have to move up significantly now. I mean, they'll have to get ahead of the Saints at 16. And the Eagles are, now they still have 2 firsts, so maybe the Eagles will be willing to trade off 15. I don't know, but
I don't think they will. I think
yeah,
they're circling one of those Georgia D linemen there at 15.
yeah,
I think
yeah.
they'll pick Wyatt or Jordan Davis.
Right. So now, if to get ahead of the Eagles, hard to see the Ravens trading down. Maybe the Texans would be willing to come down from 13. I don't know. But it now becomes a little bit more difficult to see the Steelers trading up to get ahead of the Saints. So if the Saints really do want a quarterback, and that was the reason for making this move, it's really hard to see the Steelers keeping them from doing that unless they pay a pretty significant premium, talking about getting up to 10 to the Jets or 7 to the Giants. I think it's going to be pretty tough.
And as you said, the Eagles at 15 could be, but LA needs a D lineman very bad. So if one of Wyatt or Davis is there, if you were the Philadelphia and you get the choice of Wyatt or Davis, but you trade back to 20, you risk both of those guys coming off the board. They need D line help like it's nothing. So it makes no sense for me for them to trade out. Now they trade up 18. That's a possibility. I think that's one that maybe if, say, I don't know, Cross falls to 16 and the Saints take him, and then they're thinking of Ritter, maybe the Steelers do that the 2-pick jump up to 18 to hop the Saints at 19 to get Ritter. I could see that happening. But I also think that, let's be realistic here. I never thought trade up was super realistic anyways, unless they're all in. I never got the feeling, early on it kind of felt like the Steelers were all in on Malik Willis, but as more and more has kind of come out here, I think we've kind of seen they're not. I think they like Malik Willis the best, but I don't think it's necessarily like Malik Willis or bust for Pittsburgh. I think they have other options. And it's also going to – what did they think of Corral and Howe, right? So if Ritter's off the board, are they willing to sit at 20 and still take one of Corral or Howe? That's also something to look at, because if they like Corral or Howe enough to take them at 20, they'll take them at 20. It doesn't really matter. So they might not care about this at all. They might just be content sitting there. And I'm not sure the Steelers are 100%, just put on quarterback here, that they would take, say, QB4 off the board. If Ritter's gone as well, would they take Corral or Howe? I'm not certain that they would. But that's also something to take into account here. If they like one of those guys enough where it's not where it's a pretty marginal difference, I think that's also something to take into account.
Yeah, I mean, we talked on Monday about the quarterbacks, and you can find, if you scroll up in the feed here, that video. But I mean, I don't think either of us think Corral or Howe would be a good pick at 20. That doesn't necessarily mean the Steelers agree. I certainly could see them as realistic options, but I do think it's looking less likely like sitting at 20 and taking a quarterback is the plan to me, just because of the way I feel like the rest of the draft is going to fall. So, I mean, we talked about, okay, they could trade up. They could trade down, a very un-Steelers like move, but they could trade back in the first round and still take Howe and Corral, say at like 30 or 32, somewhere in there. But okay, so if it's not quarterback and they stay at 20, I think to me the writing on the wall is that it's a corner or a safety. They've been to now at the LSU Pro Day today, where they saw where Colbert and Tomlin saw Derek Stingley. They've now been to all 3 of the top 3 cornerback pro days, and something like 6 of the top 8 overall defensive backs. Nick, it seems like DB is a real focus of this, and maybe one that has been under talked about given all the quarterback attention.
A ton of it. And I highlighted it this morning in a tweet that they are really focusing on the defensive back position, right? They've been to Boots Pro Day. They've been to Sauce Gardner's Pro Day. They've been to Derek Stingley's Pro Day. They've been to Dax Hill's Pro Day. They've been to Kyle Hamilton's Pro Day. They've been to all these guys, Louis Cine Pro Day as well in Georgia. They've been to all these guys' Pro Days. And then they sent a very large contingent to go watch Jaquan Brisker. So they clearly have interest there. And they've showcased a ton of interest as well in the mid-round guys like Jalen Amore Davis, Alante Taylor and Cam Taylor-Britt. Also at LSU Pro Day is Cordell Flott. Marcus Jones from Houston's coming in for a visit. So the cornerback/safety discussion here has been plentiful. Nick Foss, they sent Brandon Hunt to his Pro Day. I mean, they really are focusing on safety and corner. I mean, that
yeah, they saw Darian Kendrick at Georgia. I mean, there's a lot.
Like it to me seems like, as you said, if things do not completely work out in that first round and they don't like a quarterback, I think plan B is to take it the best defensive back available. And this is a deep defensive back class to where you're going to have a good safety or a good cornerback at 20 that you're going to feel pretty good about. Whether that is Booth, whether that's Dax Hill, whoever it's going to be, they're not all going to be gone. So, Stingley and Hamilton and Sauce and those guys might be gone. But I find it hard to believe that all of Booth, Hamilton, Gardner, Stingley, Hill, Brisker, they're all going to be gone by 20.
I think if you throw in the top 2 defensive linemen that they also saw, the 2 from Georgia, and the top 3 tackles that the Steelers would obviously take if we're available, even if they haven't necessarily, they didn't see Cross, but they saw the other 2, right? I mean, not all those guys can be gone. We can't just sit here and say, well, none of the quarterbacks will be there at 20, and none of the corners, and none of the safeties, and none of the defensive tackles, and none of the, like, one of those guys is going to be there. In fact, probably somebody that we don't expect will be there will end up being there. It's usually how it works, is that somebody falls from maybe a top 15 spot down into 20 or lower. And I think the Steelers really, if you look at their focus in free agency, they spread themselves out. They didn't lock themselves into a box with this pick at all. Safety is the one place where you can say maybe they haven't addressed in free agency that honestly, more so than quarterback, right? I mean, I feel a lot better about the 3 quarterbacks they have than Carl Joseph and Miles Killebrew at strong safety, right? I mean, that's a significant difference in those 2 groups. So, I mean, if you're talking about drafting for need, safety is the place to draft for need, not quarterback. A lot of safety news too, but anything else about LSU Pro Day before we kind of flip to some of that stuff?
Yeah, well, there's a number of guys there as well, not just Derek Stingley. Again, there's another defensive back there, their nickel corner, Cordell Flott, who's probably going to be a day 3 type pick, round 4. That makes sense to me to go get him. But there's also a good few linemen there, Ed Ingram, Chasen Hines. So you have a few offensive linemen to look at, maybe on that day 3 radar. Take a look at. I know Hines also had a formal with the Steelers at the Combine, so that's something to look at as well. It's not a great group of LSU players this year, but they have enough guys.
Yeah, Neil Farrell, the defensive tackles. Actually, if they don't go defensive tackle early, I think is somebody that as a day 3 pick could kind of fit what the Steelers do. Davis Price, we've talked about day 3 running backs a lot. That's an option for them as well there. So I do think there are more. Damon Clark, a linebacker, I really like. We saw at the Senior Bowl. I was really impressed by him as well. Not sure he's like a perfect fit for the Steelers scheme, but more like an outside-in linebacker, like be making a transition like maybe a Lawrence Timmons did for the Steelers. But I think really a solid player, really strong leader, and a kind of like defensive captain type from the linebacker spot that I could see the Steelers liking. So yeah, I mean, lots of good players to see, but I just think, yeah. And also not a busy day on the pro day schedule as they're kind of winding down. So not a ton of other places that they exactly could have gone today. In fact, as far as I know, LSU is the only pro day today, and the last of the major pro days. But I think, certainly notable that the Steelers sent Tomlin and Colbert there for really a group that is centered around a defensive back in Stingley. And I think the whole of their pro day approach seems like DB is way at the top of the board. Let's get to the safety news, because there's been a lot of it. The first piece is that the Steelers reportedly, and Tyrann Mathieu said Mike Tomlin reached out to him in person, still talking to Mathieu, still talking to Terrell Edmonds, haven't signed a strong safety yet. Should the Steelers be pursuing Tyrann Mathieu like this? I want to get your opinion. I have some thoughts as well, but I think to me, maybe Steelers fans are kind of in this like, oh, wouldn't it be fun mode? But I think this is a realer pursuit than people think.
Oh, another thing to note about LSU Pro Day, guess who's there? Tyrann Mathieu. So
really?
I'm not saying that they're going to be meeting with Tyrann Mathieu, but it just so happens to line up that Tyrann Mathieu is at LSU Pro Day, and so we'll see. I don't be surprised if there's some business workings with that, but I agree. I think this is
the best part of Pro Day is not watching the prospects; it's watching everything else that's happening. We can certainly agree on that.
I agree. you saw what happened to Pittsburgh the whole time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Lord. But like for me, Tyrann Mathieu is such an interesting option for the Steelers at safety. I mean, you're talking about putting him and Minka Fitzpatrick together. I mean, the coverages you could run with those two. I mean, that very well might be the best safety duo in the NFL, and it very well might be. Because again, I don't have a ton of safety duos off the top of my head, but I can't think of one that 100% rivals that. That would be elite. Now, Tyrann's a little older. He's 29, going to be 30, but he's still playing at a very high level right now. He hasn't slowed down yet. He's pretty athletic still. I mean, the guy is really good, and he's a perfect scheme fit for the Steelers. I mean, everything they do, the match coverages, the half field, too high stuff, like that's the perfect stuff. He can come down in the slot and work there as well in man coverage. You can kind of use him as his buzz defender wherever you want to use him. I like the fit of Tyrann Mathieu. Again, that's kind of a win now move, if you will. But like it makes a ton of sense with him. The fit's really good. I think he's going to cost less than people think. I've seen people throwing around like 2 years, $30 million. Like he might cost maybe 10 a year. Like I don't think he's going to cost that much, and they have the cap space to do it. It makes sense to me to bring in Tyrann Mathieu. It really does. It shores up that safety spot. Now, again, I don't even think, even though they're pursuing a lot of these safeties, if they sign Tyrann Mathieu, I'm not sure it completely takes safety off the board either in that regard. So I like the addition of Tyrann Mathieu if they can get him. I think the pursuit's real, and I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I think you touched on two really important things there towards the end. One is the salary cap. The Steelers still have a good amount of cap space left. We still haven't gotten all the details about all the contracts they signed yet, but it looks like they have, an easy amount of money that they can comfortably sign a player like Mathieu at their salary range that he's looking for. And then, what else are they spending that money on at this point? Like there aren't that many other free agents available that would cost anything near that. And they don't have any other big holes. I guess wide receiver is a place where they have another big hole still. But if you take a look at the wide receivers that are still available as free agents, I don't think you're going to find a player of the same caliber of a Tyrann Mathieu. You're not going to be spending the money on a free agent wide receiver that you would be spending on someone. I mean, it's Jarvis Landry, I guess, is probably the biggest name that's still out there. And he probably will command a reasonable salary. But I mean, I don't see the Steelers spending that money anywhere else more effectively for the needs of the team than its strong safety. So why not sign a Tyrann Mathieu? And they need to sign someone. I don't think they can go into this draft. It is not that deep of a draft class at safety. We talked about some of the top guys, Hamilton and Cena and others, but I don't think you can go in this draft saying like, we'll just get our starting safety in the draft like they can at slot receiver. It's just not that kind of a draft for me. So I think they need to do something at safety, and their ability to do something lines up really well with spending the rest of that money that they have on Tyrann Mathieu. I don't know. I think this is more likely than a lot of people think.
I'm telling you, I think the pursuit's very real. And again, it just lines up kind of beautifully that LSU Pro Days today. He's there. I mean, and they're there, of course. Now they're there to probably see Stingley and those guys, but it just so happens to line up like that, right? And we saw him visit the Saints yesterday. But don't think that Mike Tomlin is a master worker of these things, right? He probably had dinner with Stingley yesterday, and he's going to go to dinner with Tyrann Mathieu tonight or something like that. Like, that's a very realistic thing. But this is a type of guy that makes complete sense to them for the Steelers. A high work ethic type of guy that even if they draft the safety this year, we talked about a guy like Nick Cross a little bit at Maryland Pro Day, right? Draft him in round 3, sign Tyrann Mathieu. You have a really nice 3 safety set you can run, which I think are going to become more and more popular in the NFL as we continue to go through this passing era league. And so, again, I think it makes so much sense for them. And you said a great point there. And who do they spend this on otherwise? I mean, Jarvis Landry, maybe? I mean, that's the only other guy I could realistically point to. This cap space, realistically, it's not going to be spent on anyone else other than Tyrann Mathieu. And they have more than enough. And they still have, don't forget, they still have more room they can create. They can still restructure TJ Watt. They still have flexibility here in their contract situation too. So it's not like they're like, this is the hard cap. They have more room to spare. So it makes so much sense to me to bring him in.
Yeah, I think so too. And the one hiccup I think I could see being a possible is the term, right? I don't think, safeties don't make that much per year anyway. Even if you pay him as the highest paid safety in the NFL on a 2-year deal, I don't think that's unreasonable. I think it starts to get unreasonable if you're talking about a 29-year-old that wants a 5-year commitment, right? And I don't know what Mathieu wants from that standpoint, but I think that could be the that could be the sticking point in some negotiations here, is that I don't know that the Steelers would be willing to go with a lot of term for. I mean, Kevin Colbert very clearly laid out they prefer younger free agents, guys coming off their first contract. I think they would certainly sign a player like Tyrann Mathieu if they could get him on a shorter deal. I'm not sure if they had to pay a long term, if they would be willing to do that.
And don't forget, we've seen that happen this offseason with other vets. Bobby Wagner got a 5-year deal at 31 years old. Von Miller got a 6-year deal at his 32 years of age. So we've seen veterans older than Tyrann Mathieu, granted different positions, linebacker, edge rusher. Okay. But there's a map. If Tyrann Mathieu wants to follow that, he might want to. He might want a 5-year deal, right? He might want a 5-year, $50 million deal. I can't see the Steelers doing that. That's not something that they will do. 2 years, 20, I could see them doing that. 2 years, 22, something like that. I think that makes a lot of sense with Pittsburgh.
Yeah, even 330, I think by the end of that contract would be fine. It's just a question of the length beyond that. And then the other thing the Steelers have to take into consideration here is how much money they're going to be willing to spend on the safety position in total. Obviously, Minkah Fitzpatrick is a free agent at the end of this year. They're reportedly in contract negotiations with him. Do you want to spend $30 million on 2 safeties? Or maybe the Steelers, would rather have a short-term option here, maybe even a 1-year deal, so that by the time that Fitzpatrick extension kicks in for 2023, that they're only paying 1 safety a lot of money. I don't know. That's a possibility as well. They could just be looking for a 1-year option. And that's why, we talked earlier, like, why hasn't Terrell Edmonds re-signed? Maybe that's all they're offering. Maybe they only want to give a 1-year deal because they want to, part of paying a Minkah Fitzpatrick $15-20 million is the hope that he can make the guy playing beside him better.
Yeah, and Minkah's going to be the first priority, of course, and rightfully so, right? Like, the biggest thing you want in your safety is the free safety position, because that is the more impactful of the two. You get to do so much more with a great free safety, and Pittsburgh has that in Minkah. And so, of course, they're going to take care of Minkah first.
Especially when you play a lot of single high.
Yeah, and not only that, respected leader in the locker room already. Guys love him. He's a phenomenal player, and he's proven that. Had a rough start to last year, but I thought he recovered really well down the stretch. I thought he played some of his best ball really ever in Pittsburgh on the stretch, actually. And kind of people just didn't notice it. He took a beating last year. He made the most tackles on the team from the free safety spot, completely transformed how he played his game. And I thought it was a real safety valve for him. So, of course, they're going to re-sign Minkah. Of course, they're going to make him the highest paid safety in the NFL. He deserves it. But you look at the commitment to Mathieu that they would make, say, 2 years, 3 years, I think that would factor in. But I'd also say this. The Steelers don't have a premium contract coming up on that defense that's going to be like Minkah's, right? So who's coming up that's necessarily going to be paid a huge amount of money in terms of the young players? You kind of have the 2 guys in Watt and Minkah. And maybe, a 2-year extension, if he comes back and plays well, maybe that's something you have to look at. Like, maybe
Cam Sutton,
Miles
maybe?
Jack,
Yeah.
Like maybe if Miles Jack has a really good year, maybe you extend him to kind of flatten out that $11 million cap next year. Like, that's the thing I can see, but it's not like they're going to be spending a lot. So I think it could be realistic for them to take a 2-year deal with Mathieu and really pay a lot of money to the safeties. And we know how important safeties are in the Steelers scheme. If they don't have good safeties, it is hot butter. And you saw that in the mid-2010s, right, when they did not have the answers in the safety room. And ever since Minkah's come in and stabilized that, it's been a different story, and they've been able to have consistently good defenses. And I think Mathieu would just take it to another level. So it makes sense to put that type of investment in the safety position to me.
Totally agree, Nick. It's been quite newsy. Anything we missed that you want to hit on? Anywhere else you want to go over the last couple days worth of news here?
Yeah, not too much. I think we touched on everything. And again, Steelers certainly have a lot to look for in that safety room as it kind of jiggles out.
Yep, I agree. All the coverage of all this news as it happens at SteelersNow.com. So make sure you check out that stuff there. Like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. You'll be the first to know every time a new episode of Draft Talk gets posted, along with Mic Drop in the mornings and everything else we have going on here at Pittsburgh Sports Live. All the videos and other content. We'll have some more live stuff coming up soon with the draft and rookie camp and OTAs just right around the corner. So stay tuned for all that as well. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, everywhere else you can find a podcast as well. So check us out there. You want to listen in the car or on the airplane or wherever, and take us wherever you're going. We're trying to take you with us all the way through the 2022 NFL draft process. We've been to Senior Bowl, we've been to Combine, we've been to Pro Days, and we're trying to pass that information along. We'll get back to the position by position deal tomorrow. Maybe we'll talk about these DBs. I think that makes a lot of sense. Maybe we'll go corner tomorrow, safety Friday, unless something comes up that we have to interrupt the cycle. So we'll be flexible, but we'll hit all the positions before April 28th when the first round of the NFL draft starts. For Nick Farabaugh, I'm Alan Saunders. Thanks for listening again. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you tomorrow.